كتابه فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة يردني الرحمن إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين صدق الله العظيم.
Takbir. Jazakallah khair, brothers and sisters, a beautiful inspiration for the beautiful start to our night today. And we have 13 verses that relate to exactly what we're here to do today, spreading the message of justice and peace, and inshallah tranquility. With that, inshallah, next up we have the video from one of our generous sponsors for the night, and an organization that does amazing work and very relevant work for likely need of Allah these next 4 years, the Muslim Legal Fund of America. So please direct your attention to the screen. We'll have a video by the MLFA. All right, so let's just law enforcement can legally engage in how can this possibly be true? And we exist to fight injustices on the federal legal system. We will hold them to the promise. And will always citizens and the constitution behind Islamophobia and showing Islamophobia as active and fair and justice for everyone. Our expertise is not abilities. Justice and I support NLFA. They are doing incredibly critical work. And with that, inshallah, we'll have our first speaker of the night, Sister Malak Afaneh, Esquire. To give a brief intro, Malak is the first executive director of the recently founded Palestine Center for Public Policy, the nation's first center dedicated to conducting research, studies, and distributing position papers aimed at influencing public policy on Palestine. Before joining the Palestine Center for Public Policy, Afaneh served for JD from UC Berkeley Law and has a Bachelor of Arts in Politics and Middle Eastern Studies from Cornell College. She has worked over 5 years in the field of public interest, including with organizations like the Council on American Islamic Relations, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, the International Legal Foundation, the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations, and more. Afaneh also served as Berkeley Law Students for Justice in Palestine co-president, where she drafted the first BDS bylaw in the law school's history, aimed at ensuring student organizations' alignment with the boycott, divest, sanctions movement. Afaneh continues to serve as a volunteer with several civil society organizations, including as a Palestinian Youth Movement member and a U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights coach. Afaneh's involvement with the Palestine Center for Public Policy stems from an enthusiasm to challenge anti-Palestinian racism in all its forms, promote positive change in public opinion around Palestine, and foster a deeper understanding of meaningful policy solutions for generations to come. In her own words, Afaneh says, as the daughter of a Palestinian immigrant from Abu Ghosh and Al-Khalil, and as we witness the Western media's obscuring of the true nature of the genocide in Gaza, I am proud to be joining the center to contribute to establishing a vibrant platform for research and discussion that empowers Palestinians to shape their destiny. Please join me welcoming virtually Malak Afaneh.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings upon you all. While I wish I could be there in person, it's an honor to still be there with you, even if virtually. I was asked today to talk about my experiencing the blunt of repression, censorship, and the silencing of Palestinian activism as a former Palestinian student in law school and within my current status as a civil rights attorney. But I think I would do this topic a great disservice if I did not start off by first acknowledging a recent incident that occurred this past week that points to the deep levels of Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism that exists not just here in the US, but globally. Last week, a Jewish American man in Miami fired 17 rounds and shot 2 Israeli tourists, claiming he had carried out this attack because he thought, quote, they were Palestinians. After the attack, one of the victims posted on social media that this attack was rooted in anti-Semitism and called for death to Arabs. This violence is a reminder of the very real and almost deadly consequences of raging anti-Palestinian racism. During my time at Berkeley Law, I have seen the way Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism has been weaponized against our communities in 4 different ways: doxing by media, threats to employment and academic careers, legal intimidation, and last but not least, physical assault. During my time as co-president of Berkeley Law Students for Justice in Palestine, we drafted a bylaw asking student organizations at the law school to 1, support the greater boycott, divest, and sanctions movement and ensure all student funds did not go towards entities complicit in apartheid, 2, to not invite Zionist speakers to events and engage in academic boycott, and 3, to attend a Palestine 101 training that informs student organizations on Palestine and its history. 23 student organizations adopted the bylaw, and within the first week of school were blasted by every media channel imaginable and immediately met with an influx of Zionist backlash that resulted in trucks being sent to campus. Some of these trucks depicted student leaders' names on it, labeling them as, quote, Berkeley Law's anti-Semitic class of 2023, and other trucks depicted pictures of Adolf Hitler, labeling the students that adopted the bylaw as Nazis. These trucks with student leaders' names on it were not only driven around the Bay Area, but were sent to their home addresses. One of the trucks remained posted outside of my apartment for a few days, and one of our LSJP members had a truck sent to her home state of Texas, with her name being driven around the state. In the law school itself, not only were Zionist students recording our conversations and putting us on canary missions, but professors in the legal field were calling for us not to be hired. Post-October 7th, Professor Stephen Solomon at Berkeley Law published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled, "Don't Hire My Anti-Semitic Law Students," and stated that, quote, "It's time for the adults to take over," urging legal employers to ask students if they support discriminatory bylaws or other acts and resolutions blaming Jews and Israelis for the Hamas massacre. He said, "Do you want your clients represented by someone who condones these monstrous crimes?" Instead of Berkeley Law Administration condemning the fact that one of their professors was aggressively trying to harm students' possibilities for employment, Dean Erwin Chemerinsky decided to further add fuel to the fire by publishing his own op-ed, where he called for the condemnation of on-campus support for Hamas violence, demanding that these pro-Palestinian rallies, should be condemned the way that the KKK gatherings would be. The dean's actions are a testament to the way the Palestine exception to free speech is alive and well. The administration's silence of students was not only embodied, however, through systematic repression, but rose to the level of physical violence as well. On April 9, 2024, I was assaulted by Berkeley Law professor Catherine Fisk after I attempted to lead a peaceful walkout demanding the UC divest from its complicity in genocide. I was not attacked solely for speaking out about the genocide of the Palestinian people, among whom over 186,000 Palestinians have been murdered, including over 10,000 children slaughtered. I was attacked because I, as a visibly Muslim, hijabi-wearing, kufiya-repping, Arabic-speaking woman, was deemed as a threat that deserved being traumatized and assaulted simply for carrying the identities I do. I was attacked because we live in a world where Zionist administrations and the world as a whole view Palestinian bodies as constructed to die, while white ones are expected to live. I never even got past saying peace and blessings to you all and discussing the context of Ramadan before Professor Fisk charged at me, pulling at my neck, my hijab, grabbing at my chest and shirt, and trying to drag me by force through trying to take my phone. What happened after is only one example of the smear campaign that Zionists enjoy taking on. Every media outlet broadcasted only the dean's side of the narrative. I was described as a law student that lacked good judgment, that I should be barred from ever being admitted into the practice of law, that I should be regarded as utterly unemployable. However, the beauty of our movement and our communities is that we stick together and uplift each other in our times of need. It was Mahmoud Darwish that said, "We do not need to be the best, we need to be together." Thanks to Dr. Hatem Bazian and my other Muslim and Arab mentors in the legal field, I now currently serve as the director of the Palestine Center for Public Policy, a center dedicated to developing leading policy solutions on the most critical issues facing Palestine. Through a team of legal experts, policy scholars, and research fellows, our center has taken up work, including documenting the militarization and surveillance of pro-Palestinian activism by universities, and laid the foundation for research to be utilized in upcoming FOIA litigation. I also, alhamdulillah, successfully passed the bar exam and was sworn in as a practicing attorney, and now simultaneously work at the Bushi Law Firm, a Palestinian-owned law firm in New York in their civil rights department, defending pro-Palestinian protesters that have been victims of police brutality. The silencing of pro-Palestinian organizers is not new, and the tactics used by these cowards are the same ones weaponized generation after generation. They say that the old will die and the young will forget, but we know that not to be true, and we see it in the release of our prisoners, the steadfastness of our youth, and the protests around the world. Our people in Palestine who face the ultimate censorship have found ways to continue to serve the movement for liberation, whether it is through hiding messages in books to be passed around for the outside or leaving copies of poems in covert locations. They have demonstrated that the rubble will be cleared and that they will rebuild and restore, that Gaza is within them and that it will be more beautiful than before. They have continued to persevere and demonstrate the sumud and steadfastness that we all must embody until Palestine is free. So I'll leave you with this. Each one of us in this room is here with a distinct skill, life experience, background, and walk of life. Some of us may have learned about Palestine for the first time after October 7th, and some of us may have grown up descendants of Palestinian freedom fighters. What is relevant now is how we utilize our positions and our privileges in this world to uplift the voices of Palestine. In the words of Palestinian revolutionary Basil al-Araj, if you wish to be an intellectual, you must be entangled. If you do not wish to be entangled, then there is no use for you or your intellectualism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madan. And for those wondering about how the law school's progressed since that, there's improvement or not, I can give you perhaps a little insight. That same professor who wrote, "Please do not hire my anti-Semitic law students," actually went on to write another op-ed last week, titled "Mr. Trump, Please Investigate My Campus." So things are, still as they are. I thought another little anecdote was last week I was actually pulled out of one of my law classes. Last time I was pulled out of class was in middle school. I went to Granada for talking too loud in class. I was pulled out of a law class, a philosophy of law class, by one of my professors, who took me outside, not the classroom, but the entire building, and told me one of my co-professors is extremely agitated. I've never seen him this agitated. Because you have a symbol on your phone that marks Jews for death, and you need to put your phone away in my class. And I was curious, what is he talking about? Is there a swastika on my phone that someone stuck on there? It was a variant of the Palestinian flag that he ordered me to put away to get an education. And alhamdulillah, because of the learning from our scholars and from our organizations like the ISC and Dr. Hatem, that right then and there, I told them, you have no right to tell me to put my phone away. And immediately that evening, I wrote an email to all 20 top administrators at Berkeley, at the helm of which was Dean Chemerinsky, and I told them I'm opening an investigation through the Office of Preventing Harassment and Discrimination, and if you ever speak to me in such a manner again, I'll take you to the media. And so that same professor now keeps his eyes down on that class, alhamdulillah. So with that, again, this generation of scholars and elders has introduced us to fighting back, to not being silent. It is my honor to introduce a man who needs no introduction, but we'll give him one anyways, inshallah, for tonight. Dr. Hatem Bazian is a decolonial scholar who centers Islam's epistemology in all his work and examines the contemporary world through a global southern lens. Dr. Bazian is an author of 5 books, numerous chapters, peer-reviewed journal articles, hundreds of press articles, and constant academic contributions and engagements across the globe. Dr. Bazian is a leading scholar in the Islamophobia Studies field, having founded the Islamophobia Studies Center, editor-in-chief of the Islamophobia Studies Journal, and co-founder and current president of the International Islamophobia Studies and Research Association. Dr. Bazian is a senior lecturer in the departments of Middle East Languages and Cultures and Asian Diaspora Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Bazian, between 2002 and 2007, also served as an adjunct professor of law at Bolt Hall School of Law at the University of California, Berkeley. And Dr. Bazian is the national chairman and co-founder of the American Muslims for Palestine and chairman of the Muslim Legal Fund of America. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hatem.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone. I think this is our 8th annual fundraising dinner for the Islamophobia Studies Center. We've been on this journey together for quite some time. Is the presentation up? So just to speak about Malak Afaneh. Malak graduated from UC Berkeley, and she actually got hired in a law firm in New York. And the firm usually sends out a welcome to our new hire as a new lawyer. And as the email went out to welcome the new hire, the senior partner sent out an email to her firing her on the spot, because of her engagement and involvement in the work for Palestine at Berkeley Law. Now we have to respond to this, and one way to respond is that we should never allow individuals who target our young to think that they could actually cut their livelihood. And she's not the first, but another is that she's now leading the work for the Palestine Center for Public Policy. And she's leading some of our really top young people that are in public policy, political science, and hopefully many of these policy papers will inform both legal action as well as policy formation moving forward. Now, Islamophobia Studies Center engages in research and scholarship, addressing the root causes of Islamophobia, promote effective practices, foster transformative change, and also plan for real change rather than cosmetic, symbolic change. To think about Islamophobia, we always insisted that Islamophobia should be studied from an ethnic studies perspective rather than where often they would say, why don't we put it in the Middle East? Or sometimes in religious studies rather than in ethnic studies as well as critical race theory. So that's very important where the research is located and what type of work that is being done. Now, dehumanizing makes Islamophobia possible, but if we think about Gaza, it's the dehumanizing of the Palestinians and dehumanizing of Muslims that makes it possible for Israel to have dropped more tons of bombs in Gaza since October than the total bombing of London, Hiroshima, and Dresden during World War II. And yet the question still, almost the media, continues to actually reframe the debate in a completely different way because we are sitting on layers and layers of dehumanization and layers of anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia. Now, Zaid mentioned the Jewish man mistaking two Israeli tourists for Palestinians and opened fire on them in Miami. And then the victims reportedly posted that to Arabs on social media. Right? And again, here just to think about the layers of racism embedded in this 17 bullets that are shot, both in terms of the perpetrators and also the victims. And what is the racial dynamics in there that is at play? And the person, when the police arrested him, he thought that he's actually going to be possibly celebrated because he said, I shot two Palestinians, as if he discovered two aliens, right, from Mars that Elon Musk had brought down, and literally he called them or caught them at that moment. Anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia. Now, Fox News host Jesse Waters sparks outrage, saying about Palestinians uneducated and also speaking about the explosive birth rates. If uneducated, it actually points to how much uneducated Jesse Waters himself is, because Palestinians per capita is one of the most educated populations, not only in the region, but at a global level. But more importantly, if we think about this notion of the Islamic bomb, if you've been in Europe, the replacement theory, the discussions about that Europe is facing this massive influx of immigrants and constantly using all kinds of xenophobic policies, that is akin to the policies that we see here in this country relative to targeting our Latino brothers and sisters. So this is a long history of racism discrimination that you could also feed the anti-Palestinian racism into the Islamophobia. Now in Europe, by positing this problematization of Muslims and immigrants, Europe can erase its colonial history and begins to see itself as the victim of this massive influx of people that we continue, in terms of Europe and the United States, intervene and invade. Right? So this actually shifts the boundaries of what is at play in here. Now, anti-Palestinian racism, just a brief, and I know that our keynote speaker, Professor Joseph, is going to address this, but just as a quick reference, anti-Palestinian racism is a form of anti-Arab racism that silences, excludes, erases, stereotypes, defames, or dehumanizes Palestinians or their narratives. Yeah, so this is something that is ongoing, and it is a a form of Islamophobia that we need to be aware of and engage with it in that way. Now, censoring Palestine has become one of the major points in the social media, right? Social media space, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, or Meta, Google in terms of its ads, placement. TikTok, the whole debate about TikTok was specifically about Palestine, right? So literally the censoring, whether it's on university campuses or social media, is about Zionism and Islamophobia. Now, I wrote about Islamophobia on campuses and how the university functioned back in 2010, Zionism and academia. So university presidents and administrators become levers in the massive pro-Israel propaganda machine and provide the lubricating oil for the structured Islamophobic campaigns that targets Arab, Palestinians, Muslim, progressive Jews, and their allies on college campuses and in the community. University president administrators provide the public relations stage and oxygen for Israel's propaganda machine and create the conditions that further target and marginalize Palestinians, progressive Jewish voices, and communities of color that are challenging Israel. Increasingly, university leadership uses the euphemism campus climate and inclusion strategies as a spear to hit Palestinian activists on campuses. So anybody that participates in these committees, literally the committees are weaponized against Palestinian voices on college campuses. The San Francisco Federation was funding Islamophobia, right? It funded the Hillel Fund, Hillel Fund, funded major Islamophobic organizations. These are the organizations that actually have been funded by the SF Jewish Federation, and similarly in the Chicago Jewish Federation, funding some of these organizations, the David Horowitz Freedom Center, the Islamophobic Dutch politician, Gerd Wilders, the Clarion Fund, the Center for Security Policy, Middle East Forum of Daniel Pipes, and so on. All this data is from 990 tax returns. So we have it by line item, the year of donations, and literally all of these 990 were downloaded and looking at this systematic use of Islamophobia as a way to consolidate pro-Israel voices inside this country. So what we do in the Islamophobia Studies Center, Islamophobia Studies Journal, right? So this is one of our major work in terms of publishing the journal. It's the only peer-reviewed journal around the globe. Leadership in the International Islamophobia Studies and Research Association, which we actually formed and helped launch. The Islamophobia HR certificate. This is to actually begin to train human resources specialists, whether it's in the corporate or in the public sector, on Islamophobia. Most of the training right now on Islamophobia, believe it or not, is being done by the ADL. And they bring somebody that is acceptable, that basically stays outside of any critical issue to provide the training. So not only that they target our community, but also put themselves as the organization that is skilled on training on Islamophobia. They also actually offer the training on anti-Black racism. And our Black brothers and sisters have been actually actively saying to drop the ADL, because the ADL is the least qualified to speak on issues of race, racism, or on issues pertaining to anti-Black racism and Islamophobia. We also are relaunching the Islamophobia reporting app, and later on we're going to have Hani just show a mock-up of it. Is it available right now to do, or we'll do it later?
It'll be ready.
Huh?
It'll be ready.
You ready?
Not yet. Later.
Okay, we'll do it later. Country Report, Islamophobia Archives, peer review book published on Islamophobia, conferences, and workshops. So these are just some of the covers. Each cover of the Islamophobia Journal is actually designed to actually stand as an art piece by itself in such a way to provide context to the both the theme as well as what we are trying to cover. This is our latest volume. It's volume 8, issue 2. So far we have a total of 189 articles and 8 volumes, 16 volumes of the journal. So literally the hub of the Islamophobia studies. We shifted into actually open source. So now we have 139 peer-reviewed academic articles in open source through open science. So it's 139 publications. We have 186,000 views. All right, so anybody here knows academic journals? Usually, if like you get 15 or 20 people that access it, you go celebration, you do takbir, and you go possibly get kanafa. So literally 186,000. We're averaging about 1,350 of views and downloads on a daily basis in terms of access. So access in terms of the research is very robust. Now, also from publication to citation and impact, we know exactly this is not one journal, meaning the journals, meaning the Islamophobia Studies Journal, 139 publications, 136 authors, reference publications, 1,483, meaning people referencing our work, and this is only from 2023, being an open source that we're able to actually calculate, and 373 cited by publications. So literally, if you think about academic footprint, the Islamophobia Studies Journal has been able to demonstrate its centrality to the field as such. So now I'm going to shift a little bit. On your table, there's a QR code, right? And in here, there's an envelope. For those who are technologically advanced, you could use the QR code. Those who are still old technology, a pen and a paper, you could use one or the other. So please take your time to access the QR code for donations, or you could actually use old technology and write with a pen in clear letters. We do accept, even though that sometimes we do have an anti-capitalist discourse, we do accept all credit cards, Square, PayPal, and so on. So make sure to do so. And I'm going to continue, but I'll get back to the fundraising a little bit later. So in 2021, we went to open source. And our access, if you see year on year, increased by usage 4,100 pairs. So we have been maintaining this open source, and this is without a penny of advertisement for the journal or advertisement on any of the articles. We do have Instagram, Facebook, and so on. So we have demonstrated, again, the centrality of the Islamophobia Studies Journal as a site of academic scholarship and publication. Also, we hold regularly conference in France. Now, in France, as you know, many of the scholars in there don't have the ability to actually work on Islamophobia. You can't get funding in France because they don't recognize race, you can't recognize Islamophobia. So we always have a conference ongoing every December in France in order to actually engage and allow a space for scholars in France and French-speaking places. So we just had this past December. Last year, our International Islamophobia Research and Documentation was in Sarajevo, Bosnia, to discuss the comparable genocide. Because if you remember, when Ukraine took place, people said that this did not happen since World War II. It's actually Bosnia was the place where it happened, but we also wanted to compare it with Gaza as a place of comparative. This coming year, it's in May, we actually are holding a conference in Granada, Spain, and the paper submission for abstract is open until the 28th. So you still have, right, maybe you could take a break in the back with some chai and write an abstract to submit for Granada. We're doing it actually in association with the University of Granada in Spain. So we partner with a local university or local project in order for us to do so. So this will be this year in Granada, Spain, and there's discussions to actually have another one conference either in Qatar, Malaysia, or Turkey, and then after that in Pakistan in 2027. So literally we're trying to create a hub of work and connections for the Islamophobia research that is undertaken. We do the country report. This is the Canadian Islamophobia industry, one of the most comprehensive reports on Canada. It's actually one our colleague Jasmine Zine from Wilfrid Laurier University. The report was discussed in the Canadian Parliament and literally created a whole discussions and debates about the content of this report. So much of the publications that we actually put out is actually being utilized and used. The Islamophobia Muslim Society and Violence Survey to survey how Muslims feel and their responses. Understanding Christian Zionism report, Israel, India, and the Islamophobic Alliance. So all these are reports accessible on our website. Freely, you could freely download and share. This is COVID-19 and India Islamophobia. And I know Ahmed Salam in here that worked with us at the Center, Challenging Islamophobia in Public Schools. And now we have the table from Sacramento State University. All right, so they have actually created an Islamophobia project, a website, and our colleagues in here. So we welcome you to our work and continue cooperation. And I know that San Francisco State University is in the back, so I'm not leaving the Sac State network outside. So the Islamophobia Reporting Act, which will be covered. So sharing the Islamophobia Studies field, Berkeley is a global hub for the Islamophobia Studies field. Over 200 connected faculty and researchers. We are hosting visiting faculty. We host graduate student researchers, partner with academic and community organizations. We have a global conference network that takes place, consulted for the UN on Islamophobia, consult and participate in roundtables in the Arab and Muslim worlds that are taking place, sometimes positive, sometimes you just wonder why. Review and recommend book manuscripts on the subject of Islamophobia. We also do live series archives online to continue the work. Now, Ilhan Omar, this is actually a citation that she used our work in the floor of the Congress. She's cited our work, according to the study from Stanford and the University of California, Berkeley, more than 80% of American Muslims feel that Islamophobia is not taken seriously by civil society, corporate, and political leadership. So again, this is very important in terms of the work. For this year, we're trying to hire managing editor for the Islamophobia Studies Journal, and also the Islamophobia Studies HR Certificate Program Manager. So these are two new staff to expand our capacity in the work for this coming year. Funding picture, right? If you think about per hour, 1,000 hours equal 50,000, so it's a $50 per research hour average. This includes all of ours. So we're looking to fund close to 3,000 research hours in this fundraiser. So our target is about 150,000. So hopefully, in your help and your support, again, technology, QR code, and all technology. I don't do an auction and try to twist your arm. If I have knapp, I'll give you knapp if you donate, but I don't have knapp. So I'll ask you to support the center. It's a critical work that is being undertaken, and hopefully, with your support, we'll continue to expand this work, this project, to make an impact in the years ahead. We do need to challenge Islamophobia, one documentation, one research, and one publication at a time. Salam.
Dr. Hatem Bazian. Once again, I'll plug this thing. I don't have to work with technology analog, which I'll go for either. And being that with this, we can fuel the next year's fight for fighting Islamophobia at the individual and institutional level. It's an honor for me to welcome our keynote for the night, Dr. Joseph Massad. Professor Joseph Massad is a professor of modern Arab politics and intellectual history at Columbia. He's the author of several books, dozens of scholarly articles, and hundreds of op-eds. His books include Colonial Effects, The Making of National Identity in Jordan, The Persistence of the Palestine Question, Desiring Arabs, and Islam and Liberalism. His new book, The Age of Independence, A Global History of Settler Colonialism, is forthcoming from Princeton University Press. He is a recipient of a number of research and teaching awards, including the Lionel Trilling Book Award for his books Desiring Arabs, the Scott Nearing Award for Courageous Scholarship, and the Columbia University Faculty Mentoring Award. His works have been translated to more than a dozen languages, including Arabic, Turkish, Chinese, Persian, French, Italian, Spanish, Dutch, Swedish, Japanese, German, and Indonesian. Professor Massad is also a regular columnist in English and Arabic at the London-based publications Middle East Eye and Arabic 21. With that, please join me in welcoming Professor Joseph Massad.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm very honored to be here, and I'd like to thank Dr. Hatem Bazian for arranging to invite me and to be amongst you this evening. I was asked to speak about Islamophobia and anti-Palestinianism. I shall do exactly that. Islamophobia and anti-Palestinianism were born together. It was impossible to separate them at birth and millennium ago. Long before the two ideologies acquired their contemporary names as masks for conquest, what had made Palestinians their target in the 11th century is the same as what makes them their target in the 21st. Namely, the fact that the Palestinians were and remain the native inhabitants of Palestine, and that they are, in their majority, Muslim. Palestine has had the misfortune of being the location of the first European settler colony, as well as the last one. A calamity from which the Palestinian people continue to suffer and which they continue to resist. Certainly, the Palestinians were not the first Arab Muslims, or Christians for that matter, to be targeted by European armies. The first were the Arab Muslims of Spain and of Sicily and southern Italy. The latter were conquered by the Normans to extend the frontiers of Latin Christendom and wrest these territories from Arab-Muslim rule. But unlike the conquest of Muslim Arab Sicily, the Muslims and Christians of Palestine would be the first to be targeted by Latin Christendom in a holy war, subsequently known as the First Crusade. The Crusade also inspired the zealotry of the so-called Reconquista, which came to be seen as quote a second march to Jerusalem. But unlike Muslim Arab Italy and Spain, Palestine did not border Latin Christendom, even if it was the territory on which the events of the faith to which European heathens had converted originated. The sin of the people of Palestine in the eyes of the Crusaders was precisely that they were not Latin Christians. Similarly, since the Zionist project for the conquest of Palestine began, the sin of the Palestinian people in the eyes of the latest Crusaders is that they are not Jews. In both cases, Palestine was identified as a land that the Lord had bequeathed to Latin Christians, or since the turn of the 20th century, to Jews, both of whom issued from what becomes Europe. While anti-Islam structured the Latin Crusader Wars from the 11th century onwards, by the time the 19th century dawned, it would be European white Christian supremacy and Orientalism that would do so. Islam remained a structuring factor, but was now enmeshed with several questions that Europe articulated and which emerged in the 18th century, namely what the British called the Jewish question and the Eastern question. Still, the war on Muslims between the end of the 18th century and the end of World War I did not subside. Available estimates speak of about 5 million Ottoman Muslims killed between 1820 and 1914, and 6 million made refugees. The Palestinian people were spared some of these more recent murderous campaigns, but by the 20th century would be conceived by the Christian West mostly as Arabs, an identity that is most adjacent to Muslim. Still, the Arab designation remained salient until 9/11, when Europe's most recent Islamophobia, which had seen its early manifestations following the triumph of the Iranian Revolution, came to be articulated, as President W. Bush put it in 2001, as a new crusade against Arabs and Muslims that, as he put it, is going to take a while. It was then that Israel and the West re-identified the Palestinians as objectionable Muslims who must be defeated. As Bush intimated, the crusade has indeed been taking a while, and it remains with us. It is important to review the history of the birth of Islamophobia and anti-Palestinianism to understand how this came to be. In November 1095, Pope Urban II declared the necessity of recapturing the land where Christianity was born. Addressing the European converts to the Palestinian religion of Christianity, the Pope averred, and I'll quote him, "Let therefore hatred depart from among you." He's addressing Latin Christians. "Let your quarrels end. Let wars cease, and let all that dissensions and controversies slumber. Enter upon the road to the Holy Sepulchre. Wrest that land from the wicked race, and subject it to yourselves. That land which, as the scripture says, floweth with milk and honey, was given by God into the possession of the children of Israel. Jerusalem is the navel of the world. The land is fruitful above others, like another paradise of delights. This, the Redeemer of the human race, has made illustrious by his advent. This royal city," the Pope continued, "this royal city, therefore, situated at the center of the world, is now held captive by God's enemies, and is in subjection to those who do not know God, to the worship of the heathens. Jerusalem seeks, therefore, and desires to be liberated, and does not cease to implore you to come to her aid. From you, especially, she asks succor." As the majority of Jerusalem's native inhabitants at the time were actually Arabic-speaking Christians, or what the Crusaders used to call Suryani, one of the declared motives of the crusade was to rescue them and the Eastern churches from the Muslims, even though no Eastern Christians had ever complained or appealed to the Latins for help. Indeed, many Latins considered Eastern Christians heretical, just as many Eastern Christians viewed the Latins as heretics. As some historians tell us, the Arab Christians of Palestine, like the Christians of the East more generally, were some of the most unhappy and chief victims of the Crusades, alongside Muslims. As for the crime of Palestine's Arab Muslims, these enemies of God, this wicked race of heathens, as the Pope put it, it was their, quote, unlawful possession of the holy places which Latin Christendom coveted. It was, in fact, during the First Crusade that the fanatical Latin Christians named Palestine the Holy Land, replacing the biblical Old Testament nickname, the Promised Land. The people of Palestine functioned as a foil for the papacy, insofar as the internecine wars among Latin Christians were considered sinful by the Church and prevented them from serving their God. Unifying the Latins and expanding Christendom territorially were imperative as much as redirecting Latin hatred toward Muslims. And as the Latin Christians deemed the Muslims inconvertible, and the Church prohibited making peace with them because they were heathens, according to the Latin Christians, they, the Muslims, would therefore have to be slain and the survivors expelled from the so-called Holy Land. As for the Arab Christians, the Crusaders tried to Latinize them forcefully, but ultimately failed. This is why the survivors among the large Muslim and Christian Arab population and the small community of Arab Jews of Jerusalem were all expelled to make room for the Frankish settlers. But the Crusades slaughtered anywhere between 40 and 70,000 of those Muslims in Jerusalem. At the time, of course, they did so in the city, but also inside Al-Aqsa Mosque in a horrific massacre on the 15th and the 16th of July, 1099. The fanatical Crusaders were incensed that the victims fought back to defend themselves, It is said that actually that made them so angry, how dare they defend themselves. Through the Bible and the sword, the Crusades established the first European settler colony in Palestine following the genocidal extermination of its population. They called their settler colony the Latinate Kingdom. After they expelled the entire population of the city, they brought in 120,000 Latin Christian colonists, constituting about 15 to 25% of the population of the larger Frankish settler colony, which extended all over Palestine and beyond. In their settler colony, the Crusaders instituted, as an Israeli historian of the Crusades calls, an apartheid legal system. Perhaps President Donald Trump's current crusade for Gaza and call for the expulsion of its surviving Palestinian population following Israel's genocidal extermination campaign is inspired by the First Crusade and what the Crusaders have done in Jerusalem. After their defeat in the 12th and 13th centuries and the dismantlement of their settler colony in Palestine, the threat from Latin Christians by the 14th century had temporarily subsided. However, a new Christian threat was on the horizon, namely that of the Protestant Reformation, which emerged in the 16th century with a refreshed interest in the native land of the Palestinians, where Christianity and Judaism were born, and the heightened expectation of what the fanatical Protestants claimed would be the second coming of Jesus Christ. This obsession would develop into an intense messianic, millenarian, and evangelical quest among Anglicans, Calvinists, and Lutherans by the 18th century, with a focus on converting European Jews and dispatching them to Palestine to prepare for the second coming. Their zealotry coincided with the emergence of the new secular European field of knowledge called Orientalism, which sought to demonstrate the inferiority of Orientals, especially but not only Arabs and Muslims, to European Christians, and pushed in the 19th century for the necessity of colonizing them and justifying it. But it was not just a renewed interest in Palestine, about which the fanatical Protestants obsessed at the end of the 18th century. It was also Greece, and the idea that Eastern Christians continued to be ruled by heretical Muslims, an argument borrowed from the 11th century Latin Christian Crusaders. As Europe was engaged in this period in creating itself as the West that must be cleansed of any Oriental traces, a new movement called Philhellenism was most concerned with the pure essence of Greece before it had been tainted by Oriental corruption. Many European Philhellene volunteers who joined the fighting legions that went to Greece saw their solidarity with the Greek nationalists as part of a sacred crusade against Islam, as they put it, to partake of the battles against the so-called infidel Turks. They believed in the benevolence of organized Christianity, in the hateful inferiority of the Turks and Muslims, and in liberal internationalism. It was the combination of Philhellenism and evangelical Protestant Christianity that breathed fresh life into Islamophobia and anti-Palestinianism. Already influenced by the French Calvinist Huguenots and their fanatical millenarianism, the Catholic Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion of Palestine was the occasion for him to issue in 1799 the first political call by a European leader for Europe's Jews to self-expel and colonize Palestine. Napoleon called on the Jews, or what he called the rightful heirs of Palestine, to conquer your patrimony, as he put it. He declared, and I quote him, "Hasten, now is the moment which may not return for thousands of years, to claim the restoration of your rights, your political existence as a nation among the nations." Unquote. He also sought, this is Napoleon, also sought to restore Constantinople to Christendom. The twin projects of Philhellenism and evangelical Protestantism can be parsimoniously summarized as follows. Greece, located in the eastern Mediterranean, part of its peoples and histories, was cast as Western in origin, and as it had to be liberated from Muslim yoke, was abducted by the Europeans as part of the newly invented West. On the other hand, European Jews were cast as Asiatic Orientals by origin and had to be converted to Protestant Christianity and dispatched to the East, specifically to Palestine, as its new Protestant colonial population and prepare the world for the second coming of Jesus Christ. It was in many ways a most innovative demographic exchange, and not only at the symbolic level. What this exchange aimed to achieve politically and territorially was the liberation of Constantinople and Jerusalem from Muslim yoke as its express goal. In an ideological and military alliance with the European Christian powers, the Greek nationalist war of independence would become the first from the Turkish areas were identified as Greeks who had to be saved from the Muslims. The double conquest of Constantinople and Jerusalem would become the paramount and immediate goal. Even the Russian Tsarina, Catherine the Lutheran, had originally a German Lutheran, had designs through what she called the Greek project to recapture Constantinople during her conquest of the northern Ottoman territories, which became New Russia. Despite the failed attempts throughout the 19th century, a new plan would be hatched essentially in of 1916 between Britain, France, and Russia, whereby Jerusalem would be captured by the European Protestants and Catholics, British and French alike, and Constantinople would go to the Russian Orthodox. When Vladimir Lenin exposed the Sykes-Picot secret agreement after the Russian revolutionaries overthrew the Tsar, he declared immediately that the new Soviet government fully supported Constantinople's status as Turkish and Muslim forever. The Greek crusaders, who would have none of this, and in collaboration yet again with the European Christians during and after World War I, they were successful in displacing hundreds of thousands of Ottoman Muslims and Christians once more. Their final attempt to lay siege to Constantinople in the summer of 1922, however, failed as a result of British imperial reluctance and hesitation and the military strength of the Turkish nationalists. Thus, what began as a European-sponsored Philhellenism in Germany and spread to the rest of Europe as part of inventing a past for this emergent Europe of the Enlightenment, let alone for the modern inhabitants of Greece, and in which a good part of the Europe-based Greek diasporic intelligentsia and the Greek merchant class participated at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, armed with a Christian anti-Muslim zeal and a nostalgia to an invented ancient Greece, as well as to the Eastern Roman Empire, left millions dead and millions of refugees in its wake. This Christian, European, and Greek quest finally achieved its goals of the religious cleansing of Ottoman Europe and of Turkey through the Lausanne Treaty of 1923. The struggle to retrieve and abduct Constantinople, now Istanbul, to Christendom and Europe, which began with Catherine the Great, was not to be. Constantinople, unlike Greece, would never be Christian or European again. Soon attention would turn to that other city that was lost to European Christians in the hope of it being recaptured, namely the Palestinian city of Al-Quds, named as such since the 9th century, but which Europe insisted on calling solely by its ancient biblical Aramaic name, which many mischaracterize as Hebrew, Jerusalem. Throughout the 19th century, when the Greeks were chipping away at the Ottoman Empire, in the hope of one day taking over Constantinople and expelling the Muslims, European-wide fanatical Protestant missionaries embarked on the colonization of Palestine. If the Crusaders of old were armed with the Bible and the sword when they launched their wars of conquest. The fanatical Protestant colonists of the 19th century were armed with the Bible, racial science, and the navy ships of their white supremacist original homeland. But unlike the Latin Crusades, the Protestant fanatics of the 19th century called their project for the conquest of Palestine as the Peaceful Crusade. It was the new evangelical British Church Missionary Society, or CMS, established in 1799, the year Napoleon invaded Palestine, and the London Society for the Promotion of Christianity Among the Jews, established in 1809, which would pioneer the effort to transform Palestine into a European Protestant state and wrest the country from its heretical Muslim captors. Both the CMS and the London Society for Promotion of Christianity Amongst the Jews were sponsored by English society and politics, including then British Foreign Secretary Lord Palmerston and his evangelical son-in-law Lord Shaftesbury, among others. Palmerston approached the Ottoman Sultan to allow the European Jews a return, quote-unquote, to Palestine. The idea was that through secular colonialism and imperial coercion of the Ottomans, Palestine could be wrenched from them and from its Muslim and Christian population without a military expedition. The London Society for the Promotion of Christianity, on its part, converted many Jews in Britain, 250 of whom became Anglican clergymen, and many of the latter had actually been rabbinical scholars before their transformation and conversion to Christianity. By 1841, the position of patron of the London Society was conferred upon the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Anglican Church. The British fanatics, in alliance with the British government, were able through blackmail to coerce the Ottomans in 1841 to allow them to build the first Protestant church in the Ottoman Empire, which they built in Al-Quds in Jerusalem. Along with the fanatical German Lutherans, the British Anglican missionaries also demanded that the Ottomans approve the establishment of a Protestant bishopric the same year. Once established, the British dispatched the first Protestant bishop to Palestine to take charge of it. The chosen bishop was a German converted Jew, originally from the German-occupied Polish province of Posen, by the name of Michael Solomon Alexander. Originally, his name was Wolf. He had been a rabbi, and then he became. So he had been in England since 1820 and was immediately consecrated in 1841 before arriving in Palestine in January 1842 on a Royal British war frigate, aptly named the Devastation. Alexander had served as rabbi of Plymouth before his conversion to Protestantism. His mission was to build a Christian Anglican church based on converted Jews in preparation for the arrival of the Messiah. The German-British rabbi turned bishop entered Al-Quds with an escort of 100 horsemen, including his wife and his children who rode on donkeys, on the Muslim Eid al-Adha on the 2nd of January 1842. Protestant efforts to Christianize Palestine proceeded apace. Presbyterian American missionaries had been dispatched to Palestine in the 1820s to convert Arab Christians, but mostly to convert the less than 4,000 Palestinian Jews of Andalusian origins, as well as the 4,000 Messianic Lithuanian Jews who had arrived in Palestine just prior to the American missionaries in anticipation of the arrival of the Jewish Messiah. Muslims, it seemed, remained inconvertible. The Americans only stayed until 1844, when they moved to Syria and the Lebanon in light of the establishment of the British Anglican Mission in Palestine, which made the presence of the Americans redundant. The Americans, however, managed to distribute thousands of copies of their Protestant Bible before they left Palestine in the secure hands of their British co-religionists. As part of this so-called peaceful crusade, American Protestant millenarians and restorationists joined in the crusade and established farming colonies in the Palestinian city of Jaffa and hoped to convert the few thousand of Jews they encountered in Palestine and teach them farming, though they found them to be, as they put it, quote unquote, lazy and resistant to conversion. A group of American Seventh-day Adventists, known as Millerites, settled in Bethlehem in 1851, alongside European Christian settlers in the village of Arcos, but later moved to Jaffa, where they founded the colony of Mount Hope, which did not survive for long. Another fanatical group, the Dixons, established the American Mission Colony in Jaffa in 1854, which was resisted immediately by local Palestinians. The colony was attacked in 1858, and several of the American fanatical colonists killed. The rest were repatriated to Massachusetts. The US government dispatched a Navy ship, the steam frigate, the USS Wabash, to the shores of Palestine to pressure the Ottomans into prosecuting the killings. In the next decade, in 1866, another group of fanatical American Protestant artisans and farmers arrived, this time from Maine, to set up yet another colony in Jaffa. The Adams Colony, as it was named, after its evangelical leader, who called himself George Washington Joshua Adams, a former Mormon, had 156 colonists, but managed to survive for 2 years only. Adams, who had met with the US President Andrew Jackson, the butcher of Native Americans, as at the White House to facilitate his settler-colonial efforts with the Ottoman authorities, compared the colonization of Palestine to that of the United States. The Palestinians opposed the presence of the colonists, leading the Ottomans to write to the US minister in Constantinople, the ambassador at the time, protesting, driving, quote, the natives from their fields by a colony of Yankees. The failure of the colony and its indebtedness, however, was to leave after 2 years. Upon embarking on his colonization project, Adams had declared that his colony would prepare the land for the return of European Jews, which in turn would expedite the second coming of Jesus Christ. Only 20 American settlers remained in Palestine after the dissolution of the colony. Yet another evangelical Protestant American family set out on a similar mission in 1881 to establish an American colony, this time in Jerusalem. Horatio and Anna Stafford of Chicago led a contingent of 16 colonists to Al-Quds to hasten the second coming. They were joined by 55 Swedish fundamentalist Protestants in 1896. Altogether, they numbered at the end 150 by the turn of the century, and they bought a house of the Palestinian landowner, Rabah Hussein. They did not seem to want to actively proselytize others, which spared them a lot of local enmity. Their colony survived until the 1950s, when tensions among the colonists brought its demise. The Husseini house they had bought was transformed into the contemporary American Colony Hotel in East Jerusalem. Those of you who have gone to East Jerusalem might know. The Protestant colonization of Palestine was not exclusively a British and an American affair. A decade before, Germany embarked on its own colonization of Africa. A small group of Germans expelled from the Lutheran Church for their Montanarian beliefs reorganized themselves in 1861 as the German Templars, their name, of course, echoing the Crusaders' Knight Templars. And they embarked on establishing German settler colonies in Palestine. The first was established near Nazareth in 1866, and in 1869 they built another colony in Haifa. As early as 1868, the Palestinians in Nazareth attacked the Templar colonists and protested the sale of land to them. In the early 1870s, the Templars got into a dispute with the local Jaffa authorities regarding their insistence on driving their carts, horse-drawn carts, through Jaffa's crowded narrow streets down the quay. Their leader, a fellow by the name of Hoffman, described the dispute in typical European colonial racism. Quote, It is simply the resistance of barbarism to the advance of culture. I have therefore to take refuge in the might of the German Empire. The German consul intervened, and the colonists could now drive their cars in the narrow streets for only 3 hours a day. The colonists sought to consciously separate themselves from the local population in pietistic enclaves and aiming to be economically self-supporting as far as possible. Hoffman, who was the leader of the Jaffa colony, published a book in 1875 titled Occident and Orient as a manifesto in which he declared the aim of his group to uplift the East. During the Ottoman-Russian War of 1877-78, German warships came to the shores of Palestine to defend the German colonists in case they were attacked by the natives, and in the process, the German consul forced the Ottomans to finally recognize the Templars' colonies as legitimate, which the Ottomans had refused to do until then. The Templars have in fact sought to turn Palestine into a Protestant Christian state, and were hoping that it would be awarded to Germany at the end of that war. When a few decades later, the 1908 uprising of the Young Turks erupted in Constantinople, Palestinian peasants attacked the German colonies. Again, the Germans dispatched a warship to Haifa. The German colonists, in fact, in many ways, were inspirational to others, namely the Zionists, as we will see briefly. On the eve of World War I, there were close to about 2,000 Templars in Palestine. In the 30s, many of them supported the Nazi regime and were ultimately chased out by the British and the Zionists who took over their colonies. Many of them ended up going to Germany, some of the Russian colonies, or to Australia. Ultimately, after close to a century, the Protestant fanatics, just like the Catholic Crusaders, were only able to convert a few hundred Jews and Orthodox Christians in Palestine. They failed. Meanwhile, West European Jews had throughout the 19th century become fully assimilated in their own countries, whose languages they spoke, and in whose militaries they served. In France, in Holland, in Germany, Austria, Britain, those who had not converted to Protestantism amongst the Jews mostly adopted Reform Judaism, a new Jewish sect that sought to emulate Protestant Christianity in its philosophy of religion. In Eastern Europe, the Jewish Enlightenment, or Haskalah, was successful only in assimilating the business elite and Jewish intellectuals into secular European culture and modernity. European Jews resisted the Protestants' call for the removal of Jews from Europe and dispatching them to Palestine for 3 centuries. But Jewish resistance was finally broken in the second half of the 19th century when some of these enlightened and assimilated European Jews adopted the project of the Protestants and organized themselves under the banner of a new outfit called the Zionist Organization. The Protestant project, which the Europe-loving Zionist Jews adopted, was not the only ideology they espoused, as they also adopted, or more accurately, were constituted by the European Christian Anti-Palestinianism and Islamophobia. The founder of the Zionist movement, the Viennese Theodor Herzl, understood the Palestinians as surmountable objects. In line with the peaceful crusade of the Protestants, he thought the Palestinians could be conquered peacefully. In his political pamphlet, The State of the Jews, or Der Judenstaat in German, he had already anticipated Palestinian resistance. He tells us, and I quote, "An infiltration of Jews is bound to end badly. It continues till the inevitable moment when the native population feels itself threatened and forces the government to stop further influx of the Jews. Immigration is consequently futile unless we have the sovereign right to continue such immigration." Unquote. To achieve this, Herzl already confided to his diary a year earlier, 1895, that the Jewish colonists would gently expropriate the natives' property and send them packing to the neighboring countries. In his novel, Alt Neuland, or Old New Land, Herzl described the Palestinians mostly as the numerous Muslim Arabs, as he put it, of Palestine. He described them as dirty, and that the Palestinians were inhabitants of blackish Arab villages and looked like brigands. Naked children played in the filthy alleys, unquote. Notice the use of the same adjectives related to dirt and filth, which the Crusaders used to describe Muslim Palestinians in the 11th century, and also the anti-Semitic adjectives that European Christian anti-Semites described the Jews as dirty. So it's a very interesting sort of adoption of these anti-Semitic notions and Crusader notions. Lest we think Herzl had forgotten the Crusades, both the early military ones or the ongoing peaceful one, his Zionist protagonist character in his novel, a fellow by the name of David Litvak, volunteers in the novel the following. The Christian holy places have been held by non-Christians from time immemorial. Centuries having passed since the Crusades, a more enlightened view concerning these hallowed sites has gradually found acceptance. Godfrey of Bouillon and his knights, Godfrey of Bouillon, of course, was the first king of the Latin Kingdom, and his knights grieved because Palestine was held by the Muslims. But did the fin de siècle knights and noblemen harbor the same emotions at the end of the 19th century? Would any great power have dared to ask its parliament for an extraordinary grant for the reconquest of the Holy Land? The point was that such a war would have been waged less against the Turkish Empire than against other Christian powers. It would have been a crusade against the cross rather than against the crescent. The conclusion was thus reached that the status quo was the best possible status for all concerned. The idea was that if the Jews were to found a state in Palestine, they would be actually better guardians of the holy Christian places rather than the Christians fighting amongst themselves. Herzl's predictions of a peaceful European-sponsored Jewish conquest of Palestine without imperial military help did not come true, as the British would in fact conquer Palestine a decade and a half later and prevent the French and the Germans who sought to take it over from doing so. After World War I, however, and with the rise of nationalist movements, much of the racism targeting the Palestinians was not only on account of being Muslim, but also on account of being Arab. The division of Muslims into multiple nations since the rise of nationalism had made this inevitable. But regardless how it is articulated, whether as Orientalist Arabophobia or Islamophobia, the Palestinians registered in this Western ideology and for the Zionist movement as they had done before for the Crusades 9 centuries ago. Just prior to the British conquest of Palestine, Hatem Bazian, the head of the Zionist organization, who had the same contempt for the Palestinians as Herzl, saw the Palestinians as no more than, quote, the rocks of Judea, obstacles that had to be cleared on a difficult path. The British investment in Jewish Zionism had the imperial benefit of setting up a colony to guard the Suez Canal from local Muslim revolts. Their main interest in capturing Palestine during the war, as elaborated by the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, a fundamentalist Protestant millenarian himself, was the defense of the canal. Weizmann sought to reassure the British, and I quote him, that Palestine is the natural continuance of Egypt and a buffer between the Suez Canal and the Black Sea. In the case of any hostile activity on this latter side, it will constitute an Asian Belgium, especially if it will be developed by the Jews. If some more or less good conditions would be given to us, we can transfer 1 million Jews to Palestine within the coming 50 or 60 years. England will have a buffer zone, and we will have a country. Unquote. The Zionists would make good on their pledge to protect the Suez Canal in 1956 when they combined their forces with Britain and France in the tripartite invasion of Egypt. Unlike Zionism, which was always an ideology that combined religion and colonial nationalism, Palestinian resistance had in the main remained intrinsically anti-colonial and nationalist. The persistence, however, of these notions can be seen when Hamas was established in 1987. The Israelis, who had legitimized the Palestinians since the 1880s as barbaric Arabs and savages, as anti-Semites, or even later on as Nazis, began to speak of them after 1987 as savage jihadist Muslims who needed to be crushed. Immediately following the 9/11 attacks, media speculations that it was Hamas which had been behind the attacks were rife. Even though Hamas had never committed an act of resistance outside historic Palestine, it was considered the primary suspect. The twinning of Islamophobia and anti-Palestinianism would be further fortified since. In June 2009, US President Barack Obama addressed not only a local Egyptian audience, but also the entire Muslim world, as he put it, from Cairo University. He spoke about the importance of religious tolerance of Egyptian and Lebanese Christians by their Muslim compatriots, while promising to end institutionalized discrimination against American Muslims, which followed 9/11. Yet, in that same speech, he justified the ongoing murderous American military campaigns in Afghanistan and Pakistan. He could have added Yemen, but he did not, as necessary. These were countries where his administration was killing not only non-American Muslims, but also targeting American Muslims, non-white citizens, for assassination. In the same vein, Obama also wanted to provide a theological justification for an American-sponsored policy, namely the imposition of a so-called peace between Palestinians and Israelis that preserves Jewish settler colonialism and occupation at the expense of Palestinian rights. To do so, he spoke of how, quote, the Holy Land of three great faiths is the place of peace that God intended it to be. When Jerusalem, as he put it, is a secure and lasting home for Jews and Christians and Muslims, and the place for all the children of Abraham to mingle peacefully together, as in the Quranic story of Isra, which he mispronounced. And when Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, joined in prayer. In doing so, Obama was clearly stating in Zionist fashion that not only do the Jewish colonizers of Palestine not need to be tolerant, but also that they are resisted not because they are colonists, but because they are Jewish. Hence his call for Muslim tolerance and ecumenical peace rather than for an end to Jewish settler colonialism. Of course, since the Iranian Revolution, Islamophobia has come to encompass all Muslims worldwide. But just as the Islamophobia of the Crusades targeted all Muslims, Turks, and Arabs alike, it reserved a special hatred for the Palestinians. Today's Islamophobia is not so different. The Palestinians, as the worst Muslims out there, occupy the most central place in it. Since October 7, 2023, when the Palestinian resistance attacked Israel, Islamophobia surged in the US and Western Europe, targeting all Muslims or anyone mistaken for them. If Islamophobia birthed anti-Palestinianism as a mask for conquest at the time of the Crusades, today it is anti-Palestinianism that feeds Islamophobia in Europe and in the US. When the Palestinian people stand up and resist the white Christian and Jewish colonizers today, they threaten the entire ideological edifice of the Western world, which is built on the inaugural moment of the Crusades. This is why all the available weaponry of that world, including Islamophobia, have been and must be aimed at the Palestinians to defeat them. Yet the Palestinians continue to resist a millennium later, and the new crusaders persist in trying to defeat them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joseph Massad, for the amazing talk, amazing deep dive. With that, I'm sure there are questions, so we've allotted some time for question and answer. So please just raise your hand whether or a few times, so I'll catch you the first time, I'll bring over the mic.
I think I've convinced everyone. I think so.
No, I can start us off. I had a question myself.
Would you?
Yeah, so I think being in Muslim organizer spaces for a while now, there's often this rhetoric of there's a bad Muslim. Like there's a Muslim that fights back, there's a Muslim in Palestine that resists, and they're not the Muslims that George Bush praised, right, for after 9/11. And often that has a sense of internalized Islamophobia too, right? That we're so used to deflecting and saying they don't represent us, we can that. How is it that we can decolonize our discourse, especially post October 7th, to get away with this dichotomy? Not necessarily to endorse, so we want to be comfortable with endorsing specific acts of resistance, but making sure we're not throwing anyone under the bus either.
I think that that's an important question, but this is a specifically American context in the sense that after the late 1960s, after the civil rights movement and the movement by Native Americans, in addition to African Americans and Latino Americans, one of the strategies of white supremacy in the US had been to actually choose certain members of these communities and describe them as good African Americans, good Latinos, good Native Americans. And then, of course, they can be used to voice criticisms of their community. Subsequently, white supremacists would say, but this African American guy says African Americans do this and that. We're not being racist if they're saying that they do this and that. So it begins with that in the early 70s. We begin to see by the late 70s and especially by the mid 80s, they've chosen an important Muslim Arab, the now departed Fuad Ajami, as a spokesperson for that. So Fuad Ajami would come on CBS News and speak of the hordes of savage Arabs descending on innocent Israel and who hate America and things of that sort. This way, when white supremacists would say, but this is what they do, but Fuad Ajami says so, we're not being racist. So this context of sampling members of certain minorities to speak for others is a well-established practice by white supremacy in the US. So I think the idea, of course, of the good Muslim and the bad Muslim is even more insidious than your question suggests, in the sense that initially the idea was that Islam is terrible. There was a new project in the US since the Iranian Revolution, which is to speak of good Muslims. And slowly it began. Initially it was with Arabs. Anwar Sadat was the good Arab versus all the bad Arabs, right? And now there were also good Muslims. And the idea was that we're not against Islam, especially after 9/11. We're not against this Islam, we're only against one kind of Islam, a specific kind of Islam. Except that when you talk about this particular Islam, it seems to, in many ways, resemble all the other Islams that they're now speaking of. They wanted to pluralize Islam and then say, we like 99% of these Islams, but this one Islam is just a problem. Except that this one Islam ends up being, all of Islam as far as they're concerned and others. So ultimately, there is no escape from the stigma of being Muslim. Remember, even Arab Christians in this country thought they could escape it. One of the first people to be killed after 9/11, in California, if I'm not mistaken, was an Egyptian Copt. The idea of thinking that if you're an Arab Christian, you could escape the fate of Muslims, of course, is a losing battle. And so the idea is precisely that there is no escape from this kind of stigmatization, except to stand up and say, with a refusal to be defined by what white supremacy chooses to define you by, right? And the idea that unless you actually approximate a white liberal ideology, you are objectionable to us. Well, there's a way to respond to that, to speak about the history of white liberal ideology and its white supremacy, and to speak about the kinds of conquests that have been and continue to be undertaken in its name. So, and any attempt to pretend you can escape the stigma by throwing your community under the bus is a losing battle. And I think people like Clarence Thomas, for example, exemplifies this in the African American community. But we have a number of Arabs and Muslims in the US who also been collaborators with this racist rhetoric in order to get the approval of the white man. So these types of Uncle Toms, to borrow from this horrible legacy of the African American community, is not peculiar to Muslims or Arabs, but actually is typical of all non-white populations in the US.
Hi. So
So my question is, we see that the Palestinian Christians were unable to escape the stigma of being grouped with Palestinian Muslims. However, we do know, obviously, Jesus was born in Palestine, Christianity started in Palestine. Why were the Crusaders looking at the Christian Palestinians as not good enough Christians? And how would you explain the fact that you see that Druze obviously served the Israeli army? What do you think made the Christian Palestinians steadfast with the Muslims? And we obviously see such a huge separation between Arab Christians and evangelical Christians at the West.
Well, I mean, first of all, remember, Palestine at the time of the Crusades was actually majority Christian, but Arabic speaking. Because, contrary to the Islamophobic historical account that Islam spread through the sword, it took about 5 centuries after the conquest of Greater Syria, including Palestine and Egypt, before the majority of the population converted to Islam, which means it was a very peaceful and very gradual transition. And the Arab Christians of Syria, in fact, helped or welcomed the Muslim Arab conquest in the 7th century because of the despotism of Byzantium. So in that sense, there was already, of course, there were already Arab populations in Syria, and the Arab conquest was not a colonial settler conquest. So contrary to what the Zionists want to say, that the Arabs of Palestine today are descendants of Muslim conquerors, it's not true. The Arab conquest of Palestine brought less than 4,000 settlers into Palestine. The majority of the Palestinians today, of course, are the descendants of the ancient Hebrews and the ancient Canaanites. The Jews and the Hebrews were our ancestors. You know, most of us converted to Christianity, and then most of those converted to Islam over the centuries. But of course, we were also Arabized, like the rest of the population of Syria. Now, in the 11th century, of course, about half a century before the Crusader conquest, already there was a split between the church, the Eastern Church, with the Eastern Roman Empire, and what became the Catholics. So the attack was on the Orthodox, who were different from the Latin Christians. That's why they call themselves Latin. Sometimes you might hear today Christians being referred to as Greek Orthodox. They're not, of course, Greek. They're called Greek because initially Byzantium used the Greek language as opposed to Rome, which used Latin. So these were Latin Christians and these were Greek Christians, but they were actually, of all the nationalities. So Arab Christians, but also even Christians of Constantinople. By subsequent crusades, the Latin Christians completely destroyed Constantinople and killed the Christians there as heretics. So there was always this kind of attempt to differentiate. There were, of course, attempts also at converting Palestinian Christians to Catholicism, a trio. I mean, the Protestants tried after 100 years, they were able, I think, to convert 700 Palestinian Christians and about like 400 or 500 Palestinian Jews to Protestantism. So the conversion process did not actually work, and the enmity remained that God had given the Latin Christians. Latin Christendom was the most important sort of recipient of this gift that God had bestowed upon them. So Arab Christians, of course, have been in the forefront of the Arab nationalist movement since the 19th century, also of the Arabic Renaissance, of the Arabic language as well. And they saw the rubric of Arab nationalism as one that can contain them and can include them. The Druze as well. The Druze were, especially in Syria, the first revolutionaries against French occupation. So in the case of Palestine, in fact, the Zionists had a plan to expel all the Druze to Jordan by the late 1930s, but then they decided the best thing to do is to try to create schisms between the Druze and the other Muslim, the majority Muslim population, and also between the Christians and the Muslims, which is why immediately the first organizations the Palestinians established after the British occupation at the end of 1917 were what was called the Muslim Christian Associations, which insisted on resisting the British occupation and Zionism through this ecumenical unity between Palestinian Christians and Muslims. And it continued throughout the 1920s. In the 30s, they began to have separate Muslim and Orthodox organizations, but at the same time, Palestinian Orthodox Christians were absolutely appalled at the fact that not only were they laboring under British occupation and Zionist colonization, but also under what they called Greek control and occupation of their churches, because the Ottomans had continued to use Greek patriarchs in charge of the Arab churches. And until today, of course, there's been a huge revolt by Palestinian Orthodox Christians against the Greek patriarch, which uses all the lands of the church donated by Palestinian families over the centuries and sells them to the Zionists. So there's been a huge revolt against the Greek patriarchate, which the Israelis support and the Jordanian government has supported, as the Ottomans have done before. So there's always been this strong nationalist drive, I think, against the occupation, and a part of the Islamophobic Zionist attack on Palestine at the end was that, oh, the Muslims were too innocent and we can easily overpower them and convince them to allow us to colonize the country. It's the Christians who are actually mobilizing the Muslims against us. So there was that kind of in one way, you could say the Christians were more educated colonially, but also more European-like, and even more anti-Jewish, and the Muslims were somehow depicted as credulous and naive and being led by these horrible Christians. So we see a lot of attempts of this sort over the last century.
You know, thank you for the wonderful lecture, and I hope it really one more in the future. Especially for the cost of my recently, I came across a book for Palestine in the academy. That's the Arabic title for Anti-Palestinian. It has written many books. It's argument. I didn't read the book, I got the book. So there's a long YouTube for about an hour, 40 minutes. The author talked about it. And this argument, American commitment to the establishment of Christian or a Jewish state, it's a religious argument, not something else. It has nothing to do with politics. And we try to trace it from Christopher Columbus trip to America, try to convince the Queen to support him that he's going to bring gold ultimately to go to Palestine. And his argument, he said, if you study the American missionaries to Palestine and to that area, you are going to find out in those days, these missionaries had used the term Palestine 30 different cities in America for Palestine.
Yes.
So the argument basically, the commitment is religious, not something else. I myself, I don't buy the argument, but that's his argument. And I don't know if you know the guy or not. He has written about 8 books. He's one of the guys who changed his mind recently. He used to say Palestine exists in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
You know Hatem?
Not something, yes.
There are about 2 scholars who follow that argument.
Yeah.
And this guy, one of them had not changed his mind. He said, I'm sorry. And he started arguing based on archaeology. And he said, critical archaeology, nothing but nonsense.
Well, listen, I think that the religious element, the archaeological religious element is very, very strong, but of course the imperial one is very important. So in the 19th century, you have 2 things happening, colonialism and Protestant millenarianism. Now, the ideas of Protestant millenarianism and the second coming of Jesus Christ would not have been successful had there not been imperial colonialism and the British were building a huge empire. This was used hand in hand. There was an ideology, a mask for conquest, if you will. But ultimately, the Americans today, of course, don't support. There is a religious ideological element that is there, but there's also the major imperial element. President Trump is interested in the gas of Gaza, and not necessarily in a religious argument. He realizes there's a lot of gas reserves off the coast of Gaza, And yes, of course, I mean, he'll have to do Riviera. I don't know what's wrong with the French Riviera. He can go there, but the idea is precisely that. I mean, so there's an ideological level of justification for the conquest, but there's also real imperial financial interests there, right? And the U.S. is very strong in this regard. I don't think. I am someone who never believed that, as some people seem to think, that the pro-Israel lobby is the one that decides things. Not at all. The pro-Israel lobby simply supports existing American policy. It is U.S. policy. You cannot have a lobby that forces the American state to have policies that it does not want. If that was the case, the Soviets could have had a lobby to change American policy. You can't. You can only have lobbies that push existing policy, that support them, and what have you. So some people think that no, it is actually the lobby. I've never thought it was the lobby. I've written on this before, and I believe it's just American imperial interest. There's ideological lobby. You have the Cuba lobby that has always lobbied against opening relations with communist Cuba. In the 1950s, you had the China lobby, which made sure the U.S. refused to open relations with China and continued to have Taiwan occupy the China seat at the United Nations Security Council. So the Israel lobby is not unique. I mean, it is unique in the sense that today it is the strongest foreign policy lobby, but there have been precedents, right? And I think these lobbies derive their power from the high stakes that U.S. imperialism has in that region. It's not the other way around, right? So the APAC is as strong as it is because American interest in the Middle East is stronger than other areas of the world. All right, I think I will give you a rest. Thank you all for this nice reception.
Thank you. So the talk will be available on YouTube, so you could access it, share it with your network. It's very important as far as I think it's one of the most comprehensive talks that takes us from the Crusades up to the present. So we're indebted to this scholarship. And the slide that I know maybe be published someplace, so we could also have the text as well. So thank you. Now, so far we raised about 138,000. Our goal is 150. So if you have one of your involved, if you already filled it, please make sure to give it to Omar as you go out. So make sure to do that. The other thing is we do have a monthly donor program, so if you are able to do a monthly donation, whether it's $10, $20, $30 a month, that's one way to keep us going. So if you already donated, but you are able to do a monthly donation to keep us up, by all means. So we're at 138, and hopefully by the end, we'll be able to come to our target, which was 150 for tonight. So again, the QR code and the old technology is both ways are available. So Jazakumullah khair. I bring Zaid to finish up the night. Thank you, and look forward to continue the work.
Jazakumullah khair for all of our amazing speakers and for all of you for joining us here today, the sponsors to make this event possible. Once again, just want to reiterate that this is a cause that is real. It's a cause that your children are experiencing. It's a cause that you will continue to experience. And so again, think of this as a long-term investment in this community. Do not think of it as a one-off. With that, I also want to thank everyone who is able to fight back against Islamophobia using the tools the ISC provides, using the discourse it creates, using the decolonial language it provides. For so long, we've relied on the terminology and the discourse and language of the colonizer and the neo-colonizer. And Alhamdulillah is one of the organizations that is empowering us to break free from that. So Jazakumullah khair all, and please support us, whether it be through your donations or through your drafts. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
I think that's it.